الله تعالى وبركاته.
السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان ودعا بدعوتهم إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا يقربنا إليك يا رب العالمين. اللهم افتح لنا فتوح العارفين ووفقنا توفيق الصالحين. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. اللهم اجعلنا من الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من أن أضل أو أضل، أزل أو أزل، أظلم أو أظلم، أجهل أو يجهل علي. آمين. Honorable, respected brothers, elders, and sisters in Islam, I begin with the greeting of Islam by saying Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. And I personally and on behalf of our masjid and Kerala Muslim Association would like to welcome you all for this rather very interesting and unique session that we are inshallah going to engage in, something that is relating to history, heritage, and the current affairs of Muslims in Balkans. At the outset of this program, I would like to mention a few things from an Islamic lens. If we read the Quran from Surah Al-Fatiha all the way to Surah Al-Nas, one of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspires people in general, not necessarily the believers, to undertake and to engage in is to travel. There are a number of Quranic verses that allude to this concept. For instance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَانْظُرُوا كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ. O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, tell them to travel in the land and experience and see on your own the dreadful consequence of those who rejected the truth. Likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Ankabut says, قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَانْظُرُوا كَيْفَ بَدَأَ الْخَلْقِ. Travel in the land and see how did the creation originate and start and begin. So with these ayat in mind, coupled with the hadith of Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that also encourage traveling for the sake of acquiring knowledge, to seek knowledge. And there are countless narrations from the collection of the saints of Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. For example, in one of them, Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, "Man salaka tariqan yaltamisu fihi ilman, sahala Allahu lahu bihi tariqan ila al-jannah." Whoever will undertake a travel for the sake of learning, that journey itself will connect him and pave his path to paradise. And relatively and debatably a weak narration, but still nonetheless has been attributed to Prophet ﷺ, in which he said, "Utlub al-ilm walau kana bis-Sin," that travel to acquire knowledge even as far as if you have to go to China. So coupled with these ayat, these ahadith of Rasul ﷺ, what they signify is the importance of travel for a human being in general, in particular the believers. And the objective is, as I mentioned, there are three, if you look at the Quranic ayat and the ahadith. One is to seek knowledge, and second is to explore the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and third is to explore the world from a historic point of view, the rise and the fall of nations and powers, and what was the consequences of their fall and their downfall. There, as we see, if we read the history, there were many in the past, very superpower empires and states and authorities who ruled a massive part of the world, but they are no longer around. So Allah says, look at when you travel and explore the world, so you should be traveling with these intentions to be able to benefit from that and see in light of those historic realities, what could be the outcome of you and your nation when you are to engage in either of the activities that they did, which brought the consequences in their life. And therefore, Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, the great giant of intellectual legacy of Islam, a great jurist, was also a great poet. And it comes to my mind a few couplets that he said in regards to the benefits of travel. And what he said is, تَغَرَّبْ فِي الْأَوْطَانِ وَسَافِرْ. Go out of your country, and then he says, travel, فِي طَلَبِ الْعُلَى, in search of loftiness, فِي طَلَبِ الْعُلَى. And then he further says that there are فِي الْأَسْفَارِ خَمْسُ فَوَائِدِ. When somebody travels, it brings countless benefits to the person. And in fact, in another line of poetry, he says that a person who is stationed always in one place becomes like a stagnant water. When water continues to remain running, it remains pure and pristine and clean. Once it becomes stagnant, it starts to become rotten and pollutes not only itself but also the surrounding and the environment around it. So anyhow, he says that there are many benefits that a person can extract from travels. Among them, he highlights 5 of them, and they are not only limited to them, but he says one of them is تَفَرُّجُ هَمٍّ, to relieve oneself from the stress and the difficult situation of life. Oftentimes a person remains engaged in for a long time. And then he said another reason that people generally undertake travel is وَاكْتِسَابُ مَعِيشَةٍ, to earn livelihood. And the Western world is very much known for it. Most of the immigrants, they have come here and they migrated to this part of the world primarily in search of better lifestyle, in search of better life and opportunities of life. That's the reason. So, which is not haram or wrong in Islam, but this is why he mentions that these are the reasons that people travel for. And then further he says that another reason, which is very Islamic, is وَعِلْم, to seek knowledge, وَآدَاب, and to learn etiquettes. Because different cultures across the globe has different set of etiquettes. There is a saying in English, every person that you meet in your life has something to teach you, provided you have a very attentive ears and sincere heart. Every person that you meet has something to teach you, and that's a reality. So let alone our own people, what about you travel to a different continent, different country, different culture, how much can you learn from that? You can ask yourself, and how much is there to benefit from. And then furthermore he says that وَصُحْبَةُ مَاجِدِ, and there are people who travel in order to be in the company of nobles, in the صُحْبَةُ الصَّالِحِينَ. So these are the reasons that Islam in general encourages people, given the relative security of time, to travel for reasons that are going to benefit them. Now, because of the point that I shared with you, this was an opportunity for me a few months ago, by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be able to travel to Balkans and to be able to spend quite a few days. And this was in fact, one of the very, very impressive and informative travels that I have ever undertaken in my life. And so much is to share. When I was preparing my notes, I realized that there is a lot of history, heritage, conflict relating to the regions that I traveled, and time is always at the essence to be able to go through all of them, and they might not be of your interest as well. It depends on how much you are interested in history and the current politics and the affairs of the nations. So nonetheless, I have chosen some points that I want to inshallah cover, and there are still many. Hopefully we'll be able to go over in the short time frame that we have. So my travel, as I said, it was religious, and for the sake of da'wah, to be able to meet Muslims of that region and to be able to learn from them and to hear from them the challenges that they underwent in recent time, as you will hear inshallah when I cover that how did they survive those difficult circumstances and what was the loss that was brought upon them. So that was the purpose of my travel and trip. Alhamdulillah, it was very productive. And there are a number of Muslim organizations who are very active in that region, and they were the one who had hosted me, and they were the one who accompanied me throughout my travel. Moving forward, what I want to briefly touch on first and foremost is Balkan itself. Some of the brothers, they came up to me saying, because it's a very non-popular word, many of us may not even know this word or even what it relates and alludes to. So they inquired me of the origin of it and where is it exactly even in the geography of the world. So let's start with this first, a brief introduction of Balkan. This word in Arabic is known as Balkan. If you happen to, or those of us who know Arabic, we know that this was referred to in Arabic, in Arabic map basically, as Balkan. And it is a Turkish origin word. And the meaning of the word is mountains. And subhanAllah, if you travel to Balkan, you will see it's a very mountainous region, higher terrain, surrounded by very, hilltop mountains across. And so Ottomans, they named this whole peninsula, it's not an island, it's peninsula, because on three sides surrounded by sea. On one side there is of course a land that connects it to the other part of the world. So therefore it is a peninsula, and the word Balkan means mountains, range of mountains basically, and it is a nation state because Balkan has several countries that it constitutes. There are currently about 11 to 12 states that are part of Balkan. For example, Slovenia and Serbia, Bosnia, Albania, Croatia, Romania, Bulgaria. All of these countries, they are part of this peninsula. Where is it situated? It lies at the edge of the southeastern European continent. Southeastern, if you look at the map, you will see at the very south side of the European continent, this whole region is there. And it is the host of 12 or 11 different nations right now, which used to be one in the past history. When we talk about this region, one of the things that is important for us to realize that this whole region is full of natural beauty. It's, subhanAllah, we live in Vancouver, and British Columbia is known as beautiful British Columbia. And in my humble travels, I have seen that, subhanAllah, the world is full of natural beauty anyways in many parts of the world. But every place which is known for its beauty is very distinct and different from the other parts of the world that also has beauty in it. So I realized, despite our region being very, very beautiful, the beauty that Balkan has is very distinct and different. Therefore, there are subhanAllah, breathtaking, subhanAllah, views that you literally feel that, and you want to spend, literally hours sometime, if you have a reflective mind, exploring the nature. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, because one of the reasons Allah has commanded us in the Quran to travel, to explore the nature, is because nature connects you with the Creator, because there is no human intervention involved in that. Therefore, you are able to directly connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the exploration of nature. So this whole region is full of natural beauty, majestic beauty, and natural landscape. And this is why it is, in modern time, it has attracted a lot of tourism. And so especially from the Western Europe and also Eastern Europe, you will see a lot of people constantly. During my stay, I did not find any place except full of tourists, unless I traveled to the remote areas, then I didn't see any tourists. But pretty much from all over Western world, people were flocking in to explore this region and, I guess, legacy of this land. This peninsula, which is the Balkan Peninsula, predominantly is resided by Slovak speaking nation, which is basically from the Eastern Europe, Russia, and that region, because they were the one in 6th century, they invaded this land and settled here. They took over basically. And they are not the natives, but they migrated from the Eastern Europe, Russia, and that part of the world, and they took over and they settled down in 6th century. So it's a Slavic speaking language. The people of that nationality, they predominantly reside. This is why, except in certain parts of Balkan, you would generally have big difficulty in communication. Bosnia is one of the exceptions where you can easily communicate in English. But other than that, there are certain parts of Balkan regions that you have to know the local language in order to be able to communicate with them. Otherwise, you'll not be able to do so. So this is with respect to the geography and natural landscape of this land. Now, the next point is the arrival of Islam in Balkan. We, from the Islamic history point of view, whenever we study Islamic history, we see that, subhanAllah, Islam has ruled quite a bit continents in the world. And people don't realize the vast expansion of Islam over the centuries. And that is something very, very amazing. And one of the scholars said it was merely the result of the 23 years of the work of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Mecca and Medina. 13 years in Mecca al-Mukarramah, 10 years in Medina al-Munawwara. The total number is 23 years. But this huge expansion in the east, all the way up to Azerbaijan and beyond, and in the west, literally, Spain, Portugal, and part of France, and all the way up to Guyana, and in between, this huge expansion is the result of the work of Rasulullah for 23 years. There is no empire, and there is no ruling authority can rival in this regard in Islam. And that is very unique in itself, to be able to understand and appreciate that. So, thinking about the arrival of Islam in this region, when did Islam arrive in Balkan? Non-officially, it was during the time of Muslim Spain, because Muslims who lived in Spain, because Spain is part of the West, and they used to travel as merchants. So they traveled to even Balkan Peninsula, and as a result of that, the locals of Balkan Peninsula, they were able to interact with Muslims and Muslim merchants, and they familiarized themselves somewhat with the religion of Islam and Muslims. So this was a non-official interaction of Balkan people with Islam. But officially, Islam entered in this region in the time of Ottomans, Usmaniyun. And subhanAllah, it was much of the credit for the expansion of Islam in the European part goes to Ottomans, because they themselves were situated at the very entry gate towards the west, because part of Turkey is in the east and part of it is in the west. So and because of the very courageous, ambitious, and powerful rulers, all the Muhammad al-Fatih, beginning from him and down, many of them. So they were so courageous, and if you watch certain documentaries, you will see the courage of these rulers and these army generals. So it was their determination who expanded the territory of Ottoman Empire all the way to Balkan. In the early 14th century, Ottomans, they conquered basically, Constantinople, Istanbul, and then from that point onwards, they started to expand their territory towards the Eastern Europe. So Balkan is one of the very earliest expansions of the Ottoman Empire. So they went as far as to Vienna, which is in Austria. And in 16, because this started in 14th century, and within 100 years or so, the entire Balkan Peninsula was under the yoke of Ottoman Empire, under the rule and control of Ottoman Empire, within 100 years or so. So in the middle of 16th century, it was under the control of Ottoman Empire. However, the fact that when it started to expand that far, they realized that when they went all the way to Vienna, and there was a siege at Vienna where they were surrounded by, basically the Austrian Empire and also the neighboring countries. So they could not break through that siege in order to advance further. So in 16th century, according to some of the historians, in the mid-16th centuries, when they reached to Vienna, they were there halted for about 2 months. And they could not advance because it was a very fierce battle between Ottomans and the people of that region. And finally, they started to retreat because they lost. So this was for the first time after their expansion in the Balkan state that they were halted in Vienna and they could not advance further, and therefore they were there for 2 months, and then they withdrew and they went down. So the expansion of Islam, or rather I should say the Turkish and Ottoman Empire, stopped at the border of Vienna. And if you travel to Austria and Hungary today, you will see the exact location. There have been built some minarets. Some of the scholars who traveled, I didn't travel myself, but those who traveled, they went to that exact location where the siege had taken place, and the final halt for the Ottomans. And from that point, they started to retreat back. So they have built a monument at the spot. So after that, Ottomans, they turned their direction towards the east, and now they started to expand their territory towards the eastern side. So this is with respect to the arrival of Islam in this land. And before the arrival of Islam in this land, the entire Balkan Peninsula was under the control of Romans, because of Roman Empire that controlled this whole of the European continent. They also took over. Before that, there were other types of other empires and monarchies that had ruled. But in the time when Ottomans, they basically fought with the Romans to take over many parts of Balkans. And also the locals were involved in that war. So when Islam arrived in that region, it drastically and historically changed and shaped the landscape of the land and the entire peninsula, from literally cuisine to language to culture to architecture and to politics. There, you name any aspect of human life, but except it was, subhanAllah, very much shaped and changed. That is the effect of the Ottoman expansion that anyone can feel in this region. So when Islam arrived in the region, the people who lived in Balkan, they were predominantly Christians. But generally you can see, and when we live in the West, as we live in the West, we know that Christians generally here they are Catholics. But in Eastern Europe and Balkan state, there are many countries who have significant population, if not all, who are Eastern Greek Orthodox Christianity. So which is a different strand and branch of Christianity that took over and that spread in the Eastern world basically. from Russia all the way to Eastern Europe. So, and just a few differences that they both have among themselves, Catholics and Orthodox. I want to just highlight here 2 or 3 major of them, at least the major differences that they have. From the inception of Christianity, Christianity was just as one, especially with respect to Catholics and Orthodox. But they remain united all the way up until the 1,000 year completed. In 1009, when they had some differences which evolved as a result of their theological differences, they started to part ways. One of them was because the Orthodox did not recognize the supremacy of papacy, because they don't remain under the control of Italy, or basically Vatican, because to Catholics that's their central authority, but to them they don't recognize that as such. Another thing that they believe in is that they do not believe that Trinity as Trinity, that every entity in Trinity being different. Rather they say, Father, for example, he is the central figure and his power transcends to the other, the Son of God and the Holy Spirit. So this is one of the theological differences that they have. Likewise, for them, it is acceptable to annul the marriage. Because Catholics, they say, once a person enters into marriage, cannot leave the relationship unless he or she dies or commits adultery. And there is no other reason for them to find as a ground to annul the relationship. But Orthodox Christians, they believe the right to be able to annul the relationship for whatever reason the couple may have in between themselves. So these are some of the key differences. As a result of that, they parted ways, and East was predominantly the Greek Eastern Orthodox Christian, and the West basically the Catholics. So the nation in general was Orthodox. In some parts they are the majority, in other parts they share with Catholics. But when Islam arrived, Islam started to spread far and faster in the whole region. And the mass conversion to Islam took place. And there are reasons for it that scholars have mentioned in the books. And primarily, they mentioned 2 or 3 reasons that I want to highlight here for the mass conversion of Balkan nations into Islam. One of them, which is very obvious, is the charismatic, appealing nature of Islam itself. Because those who lived in that region, they suffered different types of dichotomies and different types of persecution, even remaining and living under the Christian authority. But when they saw Islam as it arrived, the classless society, they all are equal before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no one superior, there is no one lower. And this is something that was very appealing to many nations that Islam went to. For example, India, it's the same thing. So that was one of the things that attracted non-Muslims to embrace Islam. And similar was the case in Balkans, that they saw Islam as a true savior of humanity and true source of uplifting the state and the status of humanity in the eyes of others. And the second reason is the additional privileges given to Muslims because of being Muslim. And for example, those who are Muslims, they would be allowed certain things which non-Muslim would not be allowed because of living under the control of Islam, under the Islamic control. And the third reason is, as some of the scholars mentioned, especially with regards to Bosnia, they said that Bosnia was a very mountainous region which was very much cut off from the rest of the Christian world. So there was not a strong missionary work taking place in Bosnia. Therefore, those who accepted Christianity during the time of Romans, because of not having any connection with the religion, they were very mild and gentle. They were Christians by name. So when Ottomans, they came in, and when they brought the influence of the religion, so they were very open to accept Islam, and they were very open to enter under the fold of Islam. And that's how subhanAllah, Bosnia by and large accepted Islam. Another reason which is mentioned in the books of history is Ottomans, when they expanded their territory, especially in the West, Also I think there's in the center, they had this concept which is known millet system. And millet system is known as a mean to unite the non-Muslim population that lives under Ottomans and have relative autonomy to be able to administer their own religious life, social life, moral life. That state will not interfere. And this is something very beautiful about Islam. That Rasulullah he himself set a beautiful example of that when he was in Medina al-Munawwara. The Misaq al-Medina, the treaty Rasulullah prepared in in Medina, uniting the entire city, by this treaty. Everyone was given equal status, right of mobility and protection, and to be united against the invasion and attack of the outsider. So Ottomans, they developed this millet system, which is a very popular concept. Even non-Muslims who have written extensively on Ottoman Empire, they mention this. So what they did under the system, they recognized the religious rights of the non-Muslim population of the land. And they divided them into different groups. So each group would be headed by one of the religious figure and leader, and that would be the one to look after their affairs, and the state will not interfere in that. So this autonomous freedom that was given to non-Muslims in itself, according to some scholars, became a mean to appreciate the beauty of Islam. And as a result of that, quite a few of them, became closer to Islam and their interaction with Muslims, and of course they accepted Islam at the end. So this is how Islam is spread in that region. The Balkan conquest of Ottoman Empire was among the very earliest, as I mentioned to you, the expansion of the Ottoman Empire. And after that, it turned towards the east, going towards the Muslim other countries, that it expanded its territory. Islam remained in power in this region from the very early time of 14th century all the way till close to the collapse and fall of Ottoman Empire, which was in 1922. So 10 years before that, there was a very famous war. Those of us who are old enough, might have heard and followed, or not just heard, but read through in the literature of history. That war is known as, the Balkan War, Balkan First War, which broke out in 1912. This was basically a plot motivated by nationalism of the local region. So what they did, because when Ottomans, they had full control over the state, of course there were elements who resisted. There were those regions that did not like the control of Ottomans over them. So they were every time finding a way to get away and break away from Ottomans. In this regard, Serbia, even to this day, and this is why even myself experienced the hostility and animosity that Serbians have towards Muslims, it is very rare to be seen and experienced in the world. That is something which was very disturbing to me myself. And so from day one, they had, and the resistance was also very strong when Ottomans fought with Serbians. But they took over Serbia. So they had this hatred in their hearts, so they were trying to find ways to break away from Ottomans. But in 1804, they were the first one, and then the Greeks were the second, to rile against Ottomans. But as individual nations, they could not succeed. They fought, they failed. And then Ottomans again took over them. So what they did this time, they realized, we are very weak states. Individually, we cannot do. SubhanAllah, this shows the importance of unity, which the non-Muslims and the Western world has realized and benefited from. Unfortunately, the Muslim world, even to this date, does not realize the benefit of that. So what they did, they internally united themselves against Ottoman. There were massive meetings, and there were constant meetings among themselves, and they were engaged in that negotiation and dialogue. So they united themselves against the Ottoman power, and they fought Ottomans from 3 different fronts, from Bulgaria and also Serbia and other parts. So they tried basically to go all the way to the seat of the Ottomans, which is Istanbul, and tried to even take, but they could not succeed to the degree. But basically, the war that started in 1912, I think it was in October, sometime in October, and they chose a time. You see, all of these things are for us to think about. They chose a time which was a very winter time, which is a very challenging itself. Imagine you are surrounded by mountains and heap of snow and rain, cold weather. And so when they won, at the end, anyways, so this war lasted for about 9 months with interims. There were breaks in between. But Ottomans, as a result of this, they could not resist, but they fought to the best of their ability, but they lost most of Balkans as a result of that. And they succeeded finally what they had intended, the Balkan local nationalist movements. So and there was a massive, huge loss that especially Ottomans suffered, and in general, even they also suffered because of the winter condition. But coupled with that, additionally, there were a few other challenges that Ottomans had. One of them, they were at the brink of bankruptcy because of the financial condition and starvation. Many of the soldiers died as a result of the starvation. They could not sustain and survive. So thousands and thousands of prisoners, when they were taken, especially Bulgaria, what they did, these thousands of Muslim soldiers, when they took them to a region which was open, very cold. They left them with no water, with no food, basically to die on their own. That's how they expressed their hostility towards Ottomans and Muslims. And the only river that they had, which was with a flowing river, which was full of corpses and dead bodies and blood. So some of the soldiers were forced to drink that bloody water to be able to survive. And there are horrific images you can see in some of the books, how these thousands of Muslim soldiers who basically lost their lives as a result of that. So this Balkan War, which is basically, according to many historians, the first episode of the World War I. And this was, in history, the first war in all of European continents, which basically preluded to other wars in Balkan states. So as they fought in this for 9 months or so, when they lost, the entire state, Muslim Ummah, alhamdulillah, we have this empathy and sympathy in our hearts as Muslims, despite the disunity that we have. That generally when a nation suffers, alhamdulillah, we feel the pain of it. And Rasulullah defined in one of the narrations saying that this is the quality of Iman and this is the sifat of Muslim. Then al-mu'minu kal-bunyan yashuddu ba'duhu ba'dahu idha ishtaka minhu 'udwun tada'a lahu sa'ir wal-jasad bis-sihri wal-humma. Prophet ﷺ gave the example of the Muslim Ummah like a one body. Even if your toe experiences pain, that your whole body is in agony and pain. So when Ottomans were attacked from all fronts, by Balkan states, nations, so Muslims, there were certain countries who were in the forefront, not only just to pray for the success and victory of Ottomans, but also they campaigned to raise funds and to send to the army, because I said, Ottomans, where they were at the edge of bankruptcy because of the financial crisis. And also physically, there were a number of plagues, epidemics that broke out, cholera and other diseases that also took the lives of countless people. And as one by one, they were one by one, when Ottomans lost the state to Muslims from that region, because although they were relatively given the freedom to either stay or leave, so because of the animosity between Islam, or rather Muslims, and the locals, or Christians rather I should say, so they chose to leave. And where could they go? They started to march and flock towards the center and the capital of Ottoman Empire. So you can imagine thousands, hundreds and thousands of migrants even, along with the locals who are in the capital, and they all are struggling to survive. So as a result of that, Ottomans could not manage the whole situation. So Muslims from different parts of the world, they were raising funds to help Ottomans in this regard. And 2-3 names have been mentioned in this regard. India and Pakistan, they were in the forefront to raise funds and awareness. And there were a number of scholars who were involved in going door to door and pleading people to not just make dua for them, but also to give something to be able to raise funds to sustain and support the Ottoman Empire. With all these efforts, in mind, but the taqdeer of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prevailed, and for the reasons Allah alone knows, there were also things that Ottomans did on their part. They lost this region. Now, when we travel to Ottoman Empire, or rather I should say the former Ottoman Empire, which is Balkan, when Ottomans ruled over this region, they had, as I mentioned, left a massive, impressive, strong legacy that you could feel even to this date in their language. There are many words, and in their cuisine, there are many dishes. Turkish tea is very, very famous. And many other, for example, dress code and all of that. It is something that is very, very known, and the whole region, as a result of that, shaped and transformed and became a better place. Although there are biased European writers and authorities who do not acknowledge this. And they say that the role of Ottoman was basically a brutal one, devastating one, and it basically kept us away from the integration of the Western Europe and whatnot. But they turn a blind eye to the reality. But there are other fair-minded secular writers one of the very good writers in this regard is Maria, a woman who wrote a book, Imagining the Balkans. In that she highlights the contribution of Ottomans in this region that is very, very impressive. When this war was over, there were a number of elements working in the background of that, and there were three. Number one is nationalism, and number two is imperialism, and number three is socialism. And this served, all of them, they served as a contributing factor to World War I and to the expansion of the territory of the Nazi Germany power, Mussolini likewise, and Second World War. All of these things happened as a result of that. But Balkan countries, after the Balkan War, under the role of, they remained after the Balkan War under the rule of the different types of dynasties and monarchies and power. One of them was Austro-Hungarian dynasty, and likewise the nations that fought against the Ottomans, they themselves took over different parts and they ruled over for some time. And when World War I happened, that resulted into the loss of not only just lives, also certain empires. One of them was Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was completely wiped out and it was gone from the world map. And that also led to the collapse and fall of Ottoman Empire. So these were the two, but at the same time, it prepared the stage for the Second World War, because of, as I said, nationalist and imperialist and socialist mindset. So socialism or communism existed in this region in different forms, but they came to surface in 1917 when Lenin in Russia declared revolution, and basically he implemented in the true form the Soviet Union and communism and socialist movement. So from that it spread to China and other parts. So the rise of communism officially in the world was in 1917. Karl Marx himself was from Germany, Europe, but he was the one who introduced this concept, as we know, but he could not himself attain a state officially to be able to implement his idea. It was different leaders and powerful, ambitious rulers and figures who had followed him. They were the ones who took this seriously, and then they implemented in different parts of the world. There are maps you could see in which you can see for yourself the part of the world that remained under communism at some point in human history. So you will see it started mostly from the east, China, Russia, and it went further down and extended generally to the Eastern Europe, and it halted there. And part of Germany was also under the effect of communism. And in South America, parts of South America were also under the rule of, so approximately 45% of the world at some point in history was under the control of communism. You might have heard, I'm sure many of you know, socialist Yugoslavia. So this was formed at the end of the World War II. And at the end of the World War II, Tito, basically Joseph Broz Tito, who was the leader of Socialist Party in Serbia, who himself was from Serbia, Belgrade. So what he did in the war, basically at the end of the war, he united 6 federal states as a republic, socialist, country. And they were basically Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia, Slovenia, and Macedonia, these countries. So there were 6 federal states that came under as united, the socialist, federal states. So this remained in power from 1945 onwards, all the way till the collapse of Yugoslavia. So when they came in power, the concept of communism, as we know, in one way they are very much economically driven to remove the status, financial status among people. But on the other hand, one of the things that they did, very horrific thing, was to ban religious practices. So when Yugoslavia was formed after the World War II, they strictly applied their policy on all those regions that were under them. Bulgaria was not part of them. Likewise, Albania was not part of them. But the rest, Bosnia was also part of them. So all the countries that were under Yugoslavia, they were banned from practicing the religion. But it still was not as strict as in some other parts of the world. This is with respect to the history of Balkans that I shared with you. I want to talk about the places that I visited in my trip. Obviously, I will not share all the places that I went to because of the time. I will highlight only 2-3 places that I went and visited and, subhanAllah, experienced from the history of that region. So let's start with Albania. This was one of my, rather I should say, long-awaited dream destinations because of the history of this place and the recent political turmoil and religious crisis and challenges that this country underwent, along with other socialist states in the surrounding of the Balkan region. Albania, as most of us know at least, is a country very, very popular for certain things. It is a country that lies again in Eastern Europe, in Southeastern Europe basically. Adriatic Sea is on one side of it, and Macedonia, Serbia, and Greece on the other side. It is a relatively small country, and this country is, as I said, popular for certain things. One of them is the great personalities that it produced. If any of you could recall, for instance, especially for us as Muslims, I will mention some of the names of great scholars who hail and who are from this part of the world. One of the great scholars of our recent past is Sheikh Nasiruddin Albani, rahimahullah ta'ala, a great scholar of hadith. After his name is Albani, basically referring to Albania. So he was from this region, who dedicated his life to serve the science of hadith and did a great service in this regard. So he was from this region. And one of the provinces of Albania, which is known as Shkodra, he was from that region. And generally, subhanAllah, all the great figures in religious domain that have appeared on the world stage, they come out for some unknown reasons from this province, which is Shkodra. So Sheikh Nasir al-Albani, rahimahullah, is one of them, and another one is Sheikh Shuaib al-Naud. He was, in Arabic, Albanians, they are generally referred to as Al-Naud. So Sheikh Shuaib al-Nawd, he was also a great scholar of hadith of a recent past, who passed away a few years ago. He was also from Albania. Another great scholarship, Abdul Qadir al-Nawd. So these are some of the great scholars from this region. And in Christian world, another great lady that was from this region, and that was Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa, as we know, who really became the champion of humanitarian work and likewise charitable work in many different third world countries. So she was from Albania, and again she was also from Shkodra, from that region. And the international airport of Albania has been named after her, and there's a massive statue of Mother Teresa. So these are some of the great personalities that this country has produced in recent history. Albania again is also part of Balkan, and therefore the arrival of Islam in this region was with the conquest of Ottomans. With the conquest of Ottomans, Islam also started to spread as a legacy, as a lasting legacy of the region, and this resulted into the majority of the locals accepting Islam. The population of Albania is as big as it is, but the Muslim percentage of the population is 77 to 78%, which means that more than three-thirds of the local population is Muslim, and this makes Albania the only country with Muslim population, with Muslim majority population in the European continent. Because if you recognize, for us, of course, we recognize, but officially Kosovo is not recognized. It is partially recognized as the republic, but there are many other countries that does not recognize Kosovo as a republic, an independent country. Therefore, they do not give this credit. However, if we recognize Kosovo as an independent country, then Kosovo has more Muslim population than Albania. They have 95 close to percentage of Muslim population. So nonetheless, so Albania has this huge Muslim population, and Islam was very strong in this region. As communism, as I mentioned, spread to many states of Balkan, excluding Albania. Tito did not take over Albania. He only controlled those 6 states that I mentioned to you. Albania was taken over by one of the local leaders whose name was Anwar Hoxha. It was him who was the leader of the party who fought against the occupation of Nazi Germany. So, and with the support of Yugoslavia and Russia, he was able to liberate himself from Germany. And when he was able to liberate himself from Germany, so he became the president of Albania. And it was him who introduced in the region communism. And subhanAllah, there is a long history behind this. I just want to mention a few points regarding communism, because this is one of the very important things for us as Muslims to learn about and know. This is something that would be very important for us to recognize. Anwar Hoxha himself was a Muslim, because you can see from his name, by his name, it was Anwar. And Hoxha is an Albanian word which means a scholar. So he, according to some historians, his father was a religious scholar. So therefore he was named as Hoxha. And I remember in one of my travels some time ago, an Albanian lady, when she saw me, obviously appearing to be practicing Muslim, she started calling me as Hoxha. So I did not understand what does it really mean. So, when I asked her, then she explained to me, to religious figures and scholars, we call as Hoxha. So Anwar, who himself was Muslim and had a religious, strong family background, turned a man against religion. How did this happen? So there is one settled point that is important for us as parents living in this part of the world, especially. It is important in this age to realize that because he was sent to study in France, and he studied in France, and the institution he studied in basically was heavily influenced by communism. So as a result of that, he was very much affected and poisoned by the idea of communism, and therefore he was pro-communism. And when he returned as basically a person of strong support for communism, and then he actively participated in the political arena and took over the country. So what we learn from this, subhanAllah, regardless of our background, where we come from, education plays a significant role in the formation and shaping the intellect and mind and personality of the person. As I mentioned before, Sheikh, one of the great scholars of Tunisia, he mentions, Ibn Ashur rahimahullah ta'ala, in one of his books, that what I fear the most for Muslims, he said, is the wrong education, not the illiteracy, he said. Because it is better for somebody to remain jahil, illiterate, than to be wrongly educated. Because it affects, rather it poisons the mind of the person. When something is clean, you can write as what you like. But when something is poisoned and affected by the education which is not sound, then obviously it will be difficult to remove it and rewrite over it. So this is what we learned from this incident, that subhanAllah, education plays a significant role in shaping the personality of the person. If it is right education, then the person could become as great as, mashallah, great scholars that we have in the history of Islam. But if it is otherwise, then we could maybe have people like Anwar Hoja himself, and Salman Rushdie, and many others who had a very strong religious background, but because of their secular education and because of their political education, they became the opponents to the religion. So Anwar Hoja, when he took over this country, he basically forcefully implemented communism. And this communism was very different than the communism in the rest of the socialist state. What he did, basically, he isolated the entire Albania, cutting off his ties from the rest of the world. And he said to Tito that, you seem to claim that you are following communist ideology, but you are faking to follow, because you truly don't brutally apply this concept of communism in your states. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make Albania as a true communist state. Therefore, scholars have mentioned in the history that Albania became the only officially declared atheist state in the world. It was officially declared as the atheist state, and it was in early 1950s, because he wanted to show how a communism should look like. So, and when nobody was following what his idea was, so he cut off his ties and he isolated the entire region. So he basically blocked the entire country. No one could travel outside of the country, and no one neither could come in. And very few people whom he thought might not be a threat to his power, he would allow them to come in. Otherwise, and even when they come in, they would be strictly monitored. And no local was allowed to travel outside. And when I went to Albania, one of the locals who was accompanying me in my travel, he is in his, early 70s. So when he traveled outside of Albania as small as it is, he said, this is the first time that I'm stepping out of Albania, because he came with me to other parts of Balkan states. So you can imagine, because of the communist strict policy, people, they were not allowed to travel, they feared to travel, and they adopted that lifestyle, and they remained in that nutshell for the rest of their life. They never even thought after the liberation even to go out. And they remained in that confinement. So that when Anwar Hoja, he strictly applied communism, as a result of that, subhanAllah, as I said to you, Albania was by and large Muslim country with a few percentage of Christian population, some Catholics and some Orthodox like that. But because of communism and strict, brutal communism, religion was not only banned, it was strictly monitored. Strictly monitored. If anyone is to get caught by praying or fasting in the month of Ramadan, how would they do it? They would have literally police officers patrolling the area where they would suspect there might be Muslims who practice Islam. So if they would see any light on inside the house, that means during the month of Ramadan, it means that there are people who are praying or eating the suhoor. So they would be arrested and sent to the concentration camp, and they will be brutally tortured, and then will be sent to the labor work, and as a result of that they will die eventually. So and people who subhanAllah maintained their religious identity during this time, they had to completely hide their religious sentiments, their religious symbols and whatnot. And I met one of the scholars, local scholar, Sheikh Jamal, subhanAllah, who studied in Egypt, and his father during the time of communism was also a Hoja Imam, basically the scholar. Even before communism, he was serving the Muslim community. So when communism took over, so obviously as they banned religion, and one of the people that strictly monitored from religious point of view was the scholars, because they had dedicated their lives to serve Islam. So his father, what they did, they tortured him as much as they could, but obviously when after that they did, because they didn't want him to just kill like that. So after torturing for many years, they appointed him as the guard of one of the brewing industry company, basically wine manufactured industry basically. So he was appointed as a guard because he hated that most. So he was to look after that facility and patrol that. So that is how they did to torture people. This is how they did things to discriminate and dehumanize and make religious people look very, very, ugly in the eyes of others. But the scholar, subhanAllah, he continued to remain not only as Muslims, but also in private and secretly practicing the religion and teaching the religion, subhanAllah. Therefore, he sent his son as soon as he found the opportunity to go abroad and study Islam. And when he came after, subhanAllah, he became one of the scholars one of the imams of the local masjid. During the Ottoman time, this area had many masajid, Albania, like 2,000 masajid, and most of them were demolished. And those they did not demolish, what they did, they turned that into, some of them even in cinema halls. And some of them, as a warehouse. Some of them as a recreational and sports, activity center. And some that turned into a cinema hall, literally you could see that there would be minaret on top because it was a masjid, and at the door of it, the advertisement of a cinema that is going to be played on it. The sentiments, as it would hurt, the Muslim sentiments as much as it would hurt, but the reality is that this was something that the whole country suffered from. There were only a handful of mosques that did not touch, which had the historic interest and architectural interest. One of them was in Tirana, and that was the first masjid after the collapse of communism in Albania that was opened up. And Sheikh Sabri Korchi, which was one of the very senior leading scholars of Albania, who was also under the prison for many, many years. So he was the one who gave adhan for the first time. And there were many people, subhanAllah, obviously I wasn't there, but those who have experienced that and those who recorded these historical moments, they said there were tears in the eyes of people to be able to just hear adhan after many, many decades. Like literally 40 to 50 years under this strict, brutal communism, where they were not allowed to do anything having to do with religion. And other than these things, what he did, Anwar Hoja, he strictly had policy to spy on people so that nobody could speak ill of the government. And there would be neighbors who would be bribed to basically spy on the neighbors. And he had to build many bunkers across the country, 12,000 or so, to be able to monitor and block people's movement. People should remain within the local locality, should not travel even from one province to the other province. Something very much similar to what they had done to Palestine. Now they have removed all of those checkpoints, but it was like that in a similar manner. And those who would be arrested, not that they would only be tortured. In Tirana, there was a tunnel that Anwar Hoja had built which is underground building, not just tunnel, a massive building underground. And I happened to go and see that. So that building that was built, the reason that they built it, anyone who would conspire against government or speak ill of the government or promote religion, either they would be sent to concentration camps or brought to this underground facility. So there were 25, and you can see, you can even roll this up, the infrastructure and the building itself. So it's like a dome, and then you go inside. So right around the dome and all the way to the stair that lead you to downstairs, there are images of people that were hanged to death as a result of that. And 25,000 or more people have been killed in that facility because of their affiliation to religion or involvement in politics against the government. And there were many images of scholars you could see who have their bodies hung on the basically cross, or not cross, on the wall. So this is something that he did to oppress Muslims who were practicing their religion, and to make them completely liberate themselves from the religious connection. One of the things that scholars have mentioned, what he did, because of the stronghold of Islam in the region, he also prepared a group of fake preachers under the name of Islam and Muslim scholars. They would go door to door to people's house. Look at this type of madness. We had in different periods of human history these types of madness in different religions. So what he did, he prepared a group of fake preachers in the name of Islam. They would go to people's house and they would say, what was taught to you in the name of religion was all lie. All lie. There is no life hereafter, and there is no God that exists, and there is no prohibition of consumption of alcohol and whatnot. So you are free to live the life that you choose. And so they did, because propaganda, as we know very well how it affects. So when you are being told something one after the other repeatedly, number of times, number of days, number of months, so those who have been hearing this, they start to believe. So as a result of that, many of them, of course, they compromise their religious principles too. And you can see that consumption of alcohol was widely spread in the whole region during the time of communism. And even to this date, you can see bars, frequently on the road. I have seen many bars literally next to the gas station and bus station, bus stops, literally like that. And people were so immersed into a consumption of alcohol that even when the Ramadan would come, the only thing they would remember that this is a special month, and they would celebrate the arrival of the month of Ramadan by offering wine to each other, by consumption of wine. That is how they would know that this is a special month, but they did not know anything else other than this, because of the effect of the widespread of alcohol. And in one of the places that I went to, there was recently masjid being built, and just across the masjid facility there is a bar, and so at least they have. I said at least to myself that at least they have this type of connection to the religion. They would go there because they are still into this system. Obviously, the older generation, those who lived through the communism, they would go, and now because religious freedom has been granted, they would sit in bar, even they would drink, and if there is an adhan call, they would come to the masjid because of the effect of that. But at least, alhamdulillah, they have now reconnected themselves to the religion, and you can see that they are still into that effect of it, but still they are trying to recover from the effect of communism. So this went on, and when I want to now move to the next point. So this went on for about 50 years or so, and then finally, but because the country was collapsing financially, because of cutting its tie from the surrounding world, you can't sustain the economy. So it became so weak that the nation turned against Anwar Hoxha himself, and therefore finally brought the liberation and freedom, which resulted into the religious freedom as well. And subhanAllah, now people, as of speaking today, they are still, most of them regard themselves, though they don't have anything of Islam in their life practically, but they still regard themselves, most of them, as Muslims, which is a good thing, at least, alhamdulillah. And second thing, that what is important to realize as a current state of Muslims in Albania, after the collapse and fall of communism, which was in itself very fearful state for Muslims especially, after the collapse and fall of communism, there was another wave, a massive wave of challenges that were brought upon this country. One of them was because of the religious freedom now, many missionaries that flocked in the region, Christian missionaries, Catholic missionaries, and they are very active trying to convert the weak Muslims who have very barely anything of religion in their life to Christianity. So much so, subhanAllah, they are bribing, because now the country is very poor economically, and the poverty is on a rise. And they have a hard time to finding job and to be able to sustain themselves and survive. So they are bribing the younger generation, for example, by telling them, we can give you the educational scholarship, but you have to convert to Christianity. And likewise, if you want to, because of the economic condition of the country, they can't find work. So if you want to go to Greece, for instance, to work, we can give you visa to be able to go there, provided that you accept Christianity. And so this is how even the Christian missionaries became very active. Alhamdulillah, from the Muslim world, number of religious organizations also went in the region, and they tried to re-establish the masajid. They financed a number of masajid. Now, before there were 2,000 or so, now there are almost 500 or so. This whole region is still in greater dire need of Muslim financial assistance and support. So, Rahma Mercy, Muslim Welfare Ummah, all of these organizations are very active, who have established madaris and masajid, and doing a lot of work as much as possible. The challenges, among the challenges that still exist in this country, despite the freedom of religion, is because of the fear that they have that the religion might take over the country. So the religious activities, especially the Muslim religious activities, are strictly monitored. And although majority of the people are Muslim, but the people who are in the government and in power, they have barely, religious connection. So they make difficulties for people who want to run activities, religious activities, for instance, or on certain types of religious, programs that they want to do. So this is unfortunate, and because of the policies of the government in place in the country, even those schools that were built by Muslim organizations, charitable organizations, for example, Rahma Mercy, they built a beautiful, mashallah, very high academic school, academia. In that academia, I have seen that even though it's a Muslim-built school and financed, and all of the expenses are taken care by a Muslim organization, still you are not allowed to teach religion in that facility. And you are not allowed, likewise, to force any Muslim girl to wear hijab. You cannot require them, you must come wear hijab to the school, because they say it's against the policy of the state. And similarly, one of the things which was very shocking to me, even though this is a Muslim school, when you have to again have, wisdom and diplomatic approach dealing with these types of situations. So the schools all over the country, one of the integral subjects that they have to be teaching in the schools is music. So even Muslim schools, they have no choice but to add this subject to their curriculum. And they have to modify as much as they can, but they cannot completely remove this subject on music from the curriculum and the classes. So these are, and likewise, after the fall of communism, you can see the massive influence of secular values from the Western world. And therefore, when people were out of communism, now they fell into the lap of secularism and modernity. And then you can see nudity and all of those things as part and parcel of the secular values, very, very common in the region now. So this is how the condition is grappling with, this is how the country is grappling with the conditions currently. And three things that I want to end with, because it's 7:10 now. One thing about Bosnia, and the other thing is about Kosovo. I mean, this is a topic of its own, and I can't do justice to all what I wanted to discuss, but three things I want to conclude with. One is about Bosnia, and the other one is about Kosovo, and third is the relevant points in this regard. Bosnia is also predominant, rather I should say 51% Muslim country, and it is one of the very thriving countries, even during the time of Ottomans. They, mashallah, did great service in that region, building and changing the infrastructure of that region. Sarajevo, which is the capital of Bosnia, which is a very multicultural, and very diverse and very beautiful city. And it is known in that region as the meeting point of East and West. Sarajevo is the city where Archduke, who was the last emperor of Austro-Hungarian, was assassinated. And I saw the place where he was killed, which led to the World War I, and which also became the reason for the collapse of Austro-Hungarian Empire. So this is a beautiful Sarajevo city, but it also has significant Christian population. As I said, significant Orthodox Christians, and because of their hostility, when communism fell, basically Yugoslavia, so the Bosnian Serbs, who certain parts of Bosnia they dominated. So Muslim Bosnians, they are known as Bosniaks, they declared independence, but Bosnian Serbs, they did not like the idea. They wanted to remain as part of Serbia and as part of former Yugoslavia. So they started to persecute the Muslim majority territories. One of them was Srebrenica, which is the mass cemetery for Muslims who were basically tortured and killed, during the War of Bosnia, which was in late 90s, as you can recall that. So 8,000 people literally died, and they used the exact technique and tactic of Hitler in Germany. They separated men and children, men and boys from women and children, and they put them separate. And they said, don't worry, nothing will happen. And they took them to the forest and they killed them all. So this Srebrenica graveyard is a huge one. It's a very emotional site to visit. You can see, as far as you could see, the graves of all of those who were brutally killed. So this was ended by the UN intervention, of course, when they bombed, Serbian armies and forces, so they started to retreat. So this country, as beautiful as it is, but it was destroyed by this Bosnian war, and it is slowly but surely, recovering from that. And the people who died in this conflict, about approximately 100,000 people. And subhanAllah, and 50,000 or more women, they were Muslim women, they were systematically raped by the Bosnian Serbians. So this is a very horrific episode of this country, which is very sad to see. But the younger generation is hopeful for the future to get over the situation, but the hostility continues, between these two nations, between these two religious denominations and their communities. So this is with respect to Bosnia. And Kosovo, again, around the same time, because it was an autonomous province of Serbia. It was part of Serbia, but Tito had given relative autonomy to administer its affair on its own. But Milosevic, who was the last president of Yugoslavia, what he did, because he was dreaming of the greater former Yugoslavia. So he wanted to abolish the autonomy of Kosovo, which resulted into the resistance of Kosovo Muslims. And this Kosovo, subhanAllah, as I said, 95% are Muslims. But because of communism and because of American intervention during the time of war, which led basically to the end of this war, so America bombed Serbia, and some Serbian forces had to retreat as a result of that. So in this massacre and in this resistance, 20,000 or more Muslim men died, and similar with respect to that, rape cases also very, very common. So you can see in this region, Islam, despite Muslim having in huge number, very, very weak, because, subhanAllah, as they say, if I give you something, Western world policy is that if I am to help you something, but I'm expecting in return something from you. And they don't want Islam to flourish in that region. So it is said that, Allahu A'lam, I didn't read, but I heard from the locals, that although we are helping you in this crisis to get rid of Serbians, but we don't want you to implement Islam fully in this region. So therefore, Muslim schools that are being run and sponsored by Muslim government and have 100% Muslim students, cannot teach religion. On the other hand, there are private Christian schools, which was very ironic to me, in certain cities, German Christian missionary that sponsored the private Christian school. So they have freedom. And very few of them, few Muslim schools had such freedom also, but not much. So this school has freedom to teach Christianity, but what is sad about this is that 95% of the students who study in these facilities, they are Muslims, and they are being taught Christianity. So that is a very sad tragedy of the situation. So, and Kosovo, as it went through this, and then there is still intense hostility, as I mentioned, between these two groups. And I was able to visit, there's a bridge, it's called Every River Bridge. And that bridge is, on the other side of the bridge is Serbians, Orthodox Christian. On this side is Muslim, Kosovo Muslims. So, and that bridge is has been under the control since wartime by NATO forces are there. So Muslims of this side of the bridge, they don't go that side, and the Serb Christians, they don't come this side. Because if they come this side, there is no guarantee for safety and security. You could be attacked, you could be killed. This intense the situation is. And NATO army is controlling that bridge and that region as much as they can. They said and subhanAllah, one of the benefits that you get by wearing Islamic attire, although it is not wajib or something, but you get the attraction sometime. So when I was walking on that bridge, so NATO army, because obviously they saw me as a visitor and in this outfit, so they called me, and I was warned by my host, please don't go across, then I can't take any liability, because if something happens to you. And so I said, no, I just want to walk over and just see the other side. So as I walked, so the army that was guarding the bridge and monitoring, patrolling, so they called me, and obviously they don't speak English, and they were Italians, but they had a translator. There was a lady local who is Muslim, but she speaks Arabic and English both. So as I went close, so she said salam to me, Assalamu alaikum. Then I realized that she's Muslim. So through her, we engaged in dialogue with the army officers. And subhanAllah, when I expressed my concern to the region, based on my experience here dealing with Christian community, they alhamdulillah appreciated that and the work that we do here in the name of interfaith activities. I said, locals need to realize that they have to step up and accept the responsibility to resolve this conflict, because you can't be here forever. Because they have been there for about over 25 years, almost now. But you can't be here. Locals need to take this responsibility and feel the need to find some common grounds and resolve this conflict and come close to solve this issue. But the hostility and hatred is so entrenched that they don't want to even look at the face of each other. That is how bad is this. So anyhow, this is with respect to Kosovo. Just a brief overview of my travel to that region. And finally, brothers and sisters, what I have shared with you, in light of this, what I want to say, this is not something that I wanted to share as a tale and as a story from the past and the current situation of the Muslims in those countries presently. The idea behind it is primarily three things that I want to highlight here. Number one is to appreciate your religion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. Because I could see with my eyes, subhanAllah, because Islam did not reach to this part of the world as a ruling authority to be able to have that type of impact. But Ottomans, when they expanded their territory to Balkans, all the way to Vienna, I could see the lasting, strong marks of the remnants of Islam to this date, and the benefits that the locals have, sustained and took advantage of as a result of that. They may not be Muslims, but you will see as a result of that, many things in their culture is Islamic. Many things in their infrastructure is Islamic. Many things in their morals and values is Islamic. So this is indirectly an invitation, because if you're already half Muslim, what is this so difficult for you to accept the remaining half? So that is something that Allah has given us in the name of this religion, but many of us, we want to, westernize to a degree that we want to lose our identity completely. And that is a tragedy and catastrophe that we see Muslims all over the world embracing into, and especially in the West here. So this is one thing that we need to appreciate our religion, the gift of this faith of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And second thing, I shared this long discussion with you to be able to value the religious freedom that you have here. That region underwent strict communism, persecution, and subhanAllah, when I was praying, if you have connection with your history, if you read and you feel that this sense of connection. When I arrived in Albania the first night, and I was praying Salat al-Isha, somehow as soon as I put my forehead on the ground, my mind turned to the history of that land. And feeling the sense of gratitude in my heart to be able to put my forehead on the ground where sajda was prohibited for 50 years at some point in time. For 50 years. And thinking that how many people have lost their lives to be able to just pray 2 rakat maybe. How many people? I can't imagine. And it reminded me of my experience when I went to Spain, Cordoba, similar situation, Masjid of Cordoba, which is beautifully magnificent masjid, which has been taken over by Christians, Catholic Christians. It has been consecrated into church. And you can see cross all over inside the masjid, which is very, very painful. But with respect to my experience, when I made this dua that at least I want to perform one sajda in this masjid, and I made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, but when I went in, because of my appearance, subhanAllah, the guards, as I was entering in, he came up to me and said, don't pray. Immediately he told me, and I just heard him, but then I went inside, and I was just going around, I was recalling the powerful lines of poetry of Allama Iqbal when he visited Qurtuba Mosque. He felt unconscious, recalling the history of Muslims in that region and how Islam has been wiped out completely from that region. A land that Islam ruled over for 800 years. 800 years. Similarly, Balkans for 500 years. For 500 years. That's the unfortunate reality. So anyways, I found a corner. I had one of my friends in Masjid Cordoba. I told him, just monitor, I just want to pray 2 rakat. I barely could finish 1 rakat, and the God came after me. So, but the point I'm trying to say, that I was able to perform, alhamdulillah, 2 sajda, but not able to complete 2 rakat even. So that is the situation. So my mind turned to the history of that land and how people underwent. So appreciate the freedom of your religion and able to practice the religion. Most of us are oblivious of this opportunity and underestimate the value of it. Remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, days and historic periods in the world, they take turn. When you devalue something that was given to you, Allah can take away any time from you. And that is the point. And the last thing is, as I said to you, so much hostility between Christians and Muslims. Alhamdulillah, we have relatively peaceful, harmonious coexistence between us as Muslims and with our Christian brethren. It is in itself an opportunity for us to be able to better our relationship and to be able to present our religion to them in a manner that would be appealing to them. At one point in time was the case for Balkan Muslims when Ottomans had taken over that region and they were able to present Islam. There was no forceful conversion because in Islam it is not allowed. But despite that, many countries became by and large Muslim majority population because of the effect of Islam, Islamic culture and values and morality. So much so, you can see in Sarajevo there are museums, women would wear niqab, complete niqab, and they would have complete separate ceilings. And I visited certain palaces, that is how their lifestyle used to be. And even I saw in the Jewish Museum of Sarajevo, even number of Jewish, you could not differentiate between a Muslim woman and a Jewish woman, because they also had some kind of veil on their face. And likewise, a Muslim scholar and a Jewish rabbi, because they appear pretty much the same. So this was the result of the effect of Islamic legacy and culture and civilization. So these are the three things that we need to value and appreciate and benefit from, and play our part accordingly. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give all of us the tawfiq to benefit and extract the relevant lessons for our lives as Muslims, as Muslim community in this region. And may Allah spread peace all over the world and remove the tension and the tense situation and relationship between different communities, whether it's religious or political. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma bihamdik, wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, wa nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun, wa salamun ala al-mursalin, walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.